Every team, every topic, everywhere. This is Believe.
Do you love watching live TV but are tired of your huge cable bill? Sling TV has the same top cable channels for as little as half the price, so you can save hundreds of dollars while still watching your favorite sports, news, reality TV, and more. Ditch cable and get Sling's total live streaming solution with free local channels. Setup and installation are included. Make the smart choice and switch to Sling TV. Get the best of cable for the best price. Learn more at sling.com/cutcable. That's sling.com/cutcable. Setup and installation included with $49 down and $20 a month for 12 months. Restrictions apply.
Ich warte seit Wochen auf diesen Tag und tanz vor Freude über den Asphalt, als wär's ein Rhythmus, als gäb's ein Lied, das mich immer weiter durch die Straßen zieht.
Hello and welcome to Gegenpressing, the German football podcast from the Football Grad Network. I'm your host, Bryce Dunn. And as always, we'll start off by going over the weekend's results. So, on Friday night, we seen Dusseldorf 0, Mainz 1. That leaves Mainz in 10th, but unfortunately, Fortuna are bottom of the league with only 9 points. Going into Saturday, we've seen Hanover 0, Hertha Berlin 2. Ibisevic scoring on his 300th Bundesliga appearance. Hertha are now 7th, but Hanover are joining Fortuna at the bottom of the table, second from bottom. Stuttgart managed to leapfrog both Fortuna and Hanover with a 1-0 victory over Augsburg. Bremen 1, Bayern Munich 2. We've seen Bayern Munich get back 2 winning ways, moving up to 4th in the table with 2 goals from Serge Gnabry. Dortmund 2, Freiburg 0. Marco Reus scoring early on from the spot, and then that man once again, Paco Alcácer, scoring his 10th in 8 games. Yes, 10th. Unbelievable. But that does mean that Lucien Favre becomes the first BVB coach to go unbeaten in their opening 13 Bundesliga games. Things are looking very good for them. The late kickoff game seen Hoffenheim 1, Schalke 1, 2 goals from the spot, Kramaric and Bentaleb. RB Leipzig beat second place Borussia Mönchengladbach 2-0, keeping their 5th consecutive clean sheet at home. Timo Werner on the score sheet for Leipzig. Frankfurt 1, Wolfsburg 2. Unexpected, maybe, this result, as Eintracht had been doing so well recently. But here's a stat for you. Sebastian Haller got an assist, meaning that he has contributed towards 16 goals this season. That joins only Lionel Messi in the top 5 leagues this season. Quite an impressive start to the season for him. The final game of the weekend seen Nuremberg 1, Bayer Leverkusen 1, in a game that seemed more like a water polo game than a football match with the amount of water on the field. It was a rather, dreary affair, will we say. Anyway, that does it for the results. Joining me, as always, is Manuel Veth. Manu, how has your weekend been?
Yeah, Bryce, it's been pretty good. I took Saturday afternoon off and caught a Canucks game in Vancouver, and it was fun watching a different sport that I do not do any reporting about. So I had my phone away for the entire duration of the match, which was fantastic.
Nice one. That, for anyone that doesn't know, that's ice hockey, right? What was the score?
The Canucks lost 2-1, but it was good. It was a fun game to watch. And yeah, as I said, different sport altogether, something completely different for once.
It doesn't do any harm every so often, does it? Joining, obviously, Manu and I, as always, is Chris Williams. Chris, how was your weekend?
It was very nice, thank you. It feels so long since Friday night. I can't really tell you what I've done. Just enjoyed it. Obviously, enjoyed Sunday a lot, Bryce, as probably you did. Enjoyed watching Dortmund, obviously, Saturday as well. And Dusseldorf Mainz just feels like it was a year ago already. That's how long my weekend feels.
Before we jump in, what happened Sunday?
Liverpool somehow won a Merseyside derby that probably they should have won on balance, but it was looking like it was all just going to be a 0-0 draw. And then Jordan Pickford did his best Michael Jordan impression, the outstretched logo, and just decided to tap the ball onto the bar onto Divock Origi's head, who anyone that listens and who's a fan of Wolfsburg will be, what? Divock Origi scored a goal? Yeah, he scored maybe one of the most important goals in European football all weekend.
His XG must have been just through the roof. But Klopp celebrating. I like that one.
Yeah, not gone down too well over here in England. Obviously, I think David Wagner got into trouble for it 2 seasons ago with Huddersfield against Leeds, but that was because that sort of ended up in a mass brawl, so I can see that. Anyway, Klopp's been charged by the FA, probably get an £8,000 fine because he's a Premier League manager. It's misconduct, but as there was no nastiness in it, there was no foul and abusive language, there was no goading of opposition benches or supporters, I think he'll just get an £8,000 fine.
I'll take that. If my team, if 1860 would score a 96-minute winner and I was the head coach, I would take those £8,000. It's off topic, but just saying I would.
I think it would be a little bit hard not to celebrate like that with that type of goal in the 96th minute, But we'll not go into that. We got to talk about Bundesliga and German football, don't we? So, guys, let's jump in. As I mentioned, Werder Bremen won, Bayern Munich 2-1. Also, the Bavarians had a rather good result midweek, didn't they, against Benfica? Manu, would you say that they're back to winning ways? Are things resolved now? And what other news has come out of the club this week?
Well, the Benfica game was very good. I thought that they played very well, but Benfica, Portuguese football is, I think, in a bit of a dire situation at the moment, right? When you look overall, Benfica used to be a very difficult team to play in the 1990s and in the early 2000s even. And nowadays, one of the big teams from the big European leagues shows up and they more or less just roll over because they just can't compete, and that was very much evident in this match. They're just not up to the standard.
Are you saying that Benfica are that shit that even Bayern Munich can beat them?
Well, they lost 6 out of 6 last year in the Champions League, so yes, that's what I'm saying.
We are just asking for abuse by going down this route.
Well, I think the game against Werder was much more telling, wasn't it? Because I thought that Werder actually played very well in that game. And this was another side in the Bundesliga going into the match. And Bremen had struggled going into this game. I think 4 games without a victory. And they were basically saying before the match, is like, oh, we can beat Bayern. Pavlenka saying, the goalkeeper saying, look, right now, the way Bayern playing, we can beat them. And they were playing like that, right? So, yes, take the Benfica result with a grain of salt, to maybe put it a little bit less blunt than Chris did.
Well, that's it. But I think what we're talking about a little bit more than even the performances and the results at the moment is Chris, the talk about Robben and Ribéry. We've mentioned them plenty, in the last, 100 podcasts, I suppose. But it seems like it's finally confirmed now that both players will be leaving at the end of the season. Is this a good thing for Bayern moving forward?
Yeah, well, Robben's definitely going, and Ribéry is likely to follow. I think it is. I expressed my thoughts on the news as Bayern are moving in a different direction. They are a obviously very famous club, very successful club, but they're coming, and we've said this a lot in this podcast, and everyone listening will know that, they're coming to the end of this cycle of dominance, and they need a full clean out. And it happens to every side. It happened to the Real Madrid side in the 60s. It's starting to happen to the Barcelona side now. It happened to Manchester United in England. It's happened to teams in Germany previously. Wolfsburg, for example, when they started hemorrhaging all their best players. The players leave, the teams go through a cycle, players leave, and they need to be replaced. And I think that's what we've all been critical about, is that maybe Bayern haven't built up to this position yet. They haven't made players, and now is a real critical time for them, because I quite likely think that the both of them will leave. I probably think, I do think that Hummels will also leave. So they're going to have to maybe buy a couple more players, maybe go through the scouting department, bringing in some newer players, the likes of Gnabry, likes of Goetzke, the likes of Rudy, and Sula. That's the sort of players that they need, and ultimately a replacement for Neuer at some point. So yes, I think what we're going to see, it's a very long answer this, Bryce, I'm sorry, but what we're going to see now is the start of the last 10 years and maybe the last 6, this title winning side that's just steamrolled German football will be broken up, and it's going to be really interesting to see how they're replaced and what the fallout will be for Bayern in 2 to 3 seasons' time.
And I suppose one of the players that we talked being that part of that next generation of, Bayern success, they'll be hoping, is Serge Gnabry, who scored 2 this weekend, I suppose. But Manu, how will Robben and Ribéry's legacy be seen when we look back on it?
Well, I think Jonathan Harding put it very well in his article for DW. I retweeted it, and it's really worth a read. He said Robben may be the best player at Bayern for the last 10 years. And I think he might be right. And I think Ribéry is probably in that same category. One thing that's been circulated a lot this week after the announcement came out with Robben, Uli Hoeneß actually said at a fan club meeting in Franconia that he doesn't think Ribéry will come back either. So it's not officially confirmed, but it pretty much is. And there was the 2010 game against Manchester United where Ribéry played in the corner all the way outside the 16-yard box, and Robben just hit that ball directly and it went in, and it was a 3-2 on the night, which saw Bayern go through an aggregate to eventually make the final against Inter. And that was really the beginning of that era, right? Of the Ribéry era. And I think when we look back, we will have to look back and say, okay, well, these 2 players really defined the club over the last 10 years. They were probably the best left-right wing combination when they were both healthy in world football, when they were at the peak. So that is the legacy they're going to leave behind. They're going to be club legends. And I think the game, I thought Robben was very good against Benfica. He was excellent, actually. And I think there's still a few more good games left in him. So he may, and this is maybe one thing where I slightly disagree with Jonathan Harding. He said they should have maybe parted ways 2 years ago. I slightly disagree with that. 2 years ago, they were both still very, very good players. And I think they both may have just caught it just in time, that exit door. Sometimes people leave too late. I think they may have just left just in time, because I think Bayern will still finish top 4 this year. In the end, the good memories will overshadow the negatives. I mean, remember, they have won 6 Bundesliga titles in a row and the Champions League.
Yeah, hell of an achievement. Both fantastic players, and they'll be missed, but I suppose every player has to come to the end of their career, don't they? But Manu, and speaking about people who could leave Bayern, they're not the only 2. There's some other names also further up in the I don't know, up in the boardroom.
Yeah, this is a pattern, Chris, that's emerging here. Every Friday we get the big Bayern news. This Friday they had the AGM, the annual general meeting. And, but while Bayern announced once again big record sums of, annual turnover, I think that the region of 660 million euros, I think they have bunkered somewhere in the region of 440 million euros in their savings account. This is money that they own, all right? It's not loaned money. This is just money that they have lying around that can be used for investing. Those are all, record numbers, but there was a lot of criticism towards Hoeneß and Rummenigge. The Qatar deal was criticized. The way the club has treated club legend Paul Breitner. Paul Breitner, of course, spoke out against Hoeneß's and Rummenigge's press conference that took place on a Friday about 4 or 5 weeks ago. And he was also criticized for giving Kovac a 3-year deal by some fans. And then he was booed for not wanting to discuss any of these issues at the annual general meeting. And that is, afterwards you could sort of see that there was a little bit of resignation. Behind closed doors, Rummenigge and Hoeneß are working on their legacy and who's going to take over. And one name that you hear over and over again is Oliver Kahn, to become the next CEO once Rummenigge steps down. I think that's a logical choice. Oliver Kahn has an MBA. He's well educated. He's built actually a business since he's retired, a goal play that represents the Bundesliga in Asia, and he's very successful in that department. So he has walked that path successfully from the pitch to the boardroom in some ways, and is a very well-known figure around the world. He is a kind of person who gets respect from the players for what he has achieved, but can also get a meeting with someone with the CEO from Siemens, for example, right? Or a high-ranking politician in Munich, right? That's the kind of profile he has, and that's the kind of profile you want to look for. So that is sort of in the works. The big question, of course, is Oliver Kahn willing to give up his private enterprise to take over Bayern as a CEO?
Well, Manu, do you think it would be a good move, in your opinion?
For Oliver Kahn?
Yeah, I mean, you probably know his personality better than most. Do you think that he'd be the right man for such a position?
Yeah, I do think he would be the right man for that position. The question is, does he want to give up his own business ventures? This will not be a cheap transfer for Bayern, to use those terms, because if you take someone who's successful in his private enterprises, you will have to offer them significant money to take over a club, because Bayern, being the CEO of Bayern, is a full-time job. You cannot run a business on the side, right? So I think that is from what you hear from Oliver Kahn's party, this is the one thing he's still kind of contemplating. But on the other hand, I think I could see him do it, because remember when we had the whole Philipp Lahm situation where Philipp Lahm wasn't given the power because Hoeneß and Rummenigge were still around? This would be different here. The club is willing to give Kahn all the power to run the club the way he wants to run the club.
This is John Grills from the Creepy Podcast. With Best Christmas Ever on AMC Plus, every day feels like Christmas morning. From new holiday favorites like Elf and National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation to modern iconic family classics like The Polar Express and The Year Without a Santa Claus, you can spend the holiday season opening only the good stuff. Plus, you get a stocking stuffed with highly acclaimed AMC series like The Walking Dead and Mad Men, new series like Gangs of London and The Walking Dead World Beyond. And you're also getting your favorite iconic Christmas movies without having to search. AMC Plus is available on all your devices. Sign up today at amcplus.com. AMC Plus, only the good stuff.
Yes, indeed. And Chris, I mean, you mentioned about Robben and Ribéry leaving, and that really, things need to change for Bayern. It's probably time. But do you think there's a risk then of two legendary players, three potentially? You said it as well with Hummels, and then like Rummenigge and Hoeneß, maybe not staying at the club in the boards. Do you think that this is all maybe too much for a club to go through a change like this, or do you think Bayern are the type of club that can come out of this and be rather successful quite quickly?
Yeah, I think they are probably big enough to deal with this. If they were someone, no disrespect, but if they were someone like Freiburg or if they were someone like Mainz, I don't think it's wise to have 3 or 4 of your elder senior players leave and then maybe 2 or 3 connected with the higher management of the club to leave. But someone like Bayern, yeah, they can, because they will make sure that they bring in the best, as Manu's already suggested. And I think if you're going to do a clean break of a club as big as Bayern, maybe it's better to shed the skin like a snake and just get rid of it all in one, and then everybody knows where they are. You're not saying, okay, so Robben and Ribéry are leaving this year with maybe Hummels, and then next season Hoeneß is leaving, this season after that Rummenigge is leaving. If everybody goes and then the start of next season there's new people in the job, everybody's working off the same, everybody's singing off the same hymn sheet, everybody knows which way the club's going to go. There's nobody half concentrated because they've got an eye on the exit. Everybody's brand new in, fresh, raring for the challenge to take Bayern back to the top. So I think it could work in their favour.
Yeah, maybe just to add real quickly to this, the way I understand is that there would be a bit of a transition period. So the next season, I agree with Chris. I think Hummels could be one of the players out of the door, especially if Kovac sticks around. But then next season, Rummenigge and Hoeneß would then bring bring in their replacements, but not leave right away. I think they want to soften the blow a little bit, which makes sense because, as you said, Chris, a lot of people leaving all at once, that can be a big turnover.
Yeah, it can be a hard thing to recover from, can't it? But we have mentioned for quite some time that we feel that they do need to change a few things at the club, and I suppose even the results this season have, only supported that theory as well. But I'm going to go back to you, Chris, on this one. There's talk, if we speak about Dortmund for a little moment and Pulisic, we've mentioned them plenty of times, and that he'd possibly be on the move maybe in the summer, but it could be earlier than that with talks of him going to Chelsea. Why is this? Why an early move, and what's the likelihood?
Well, Chelsea are trying to get an early move because they have got a potential upcoming transfer ban, which could be instigated by FIFA in January. So they're hoping to bring forward any transfers that they may want to do next summer through to January. Now, Dortmund have said all along that they're not prepared to let him go before the end of the season. And I think that's quite wise because they're in the middle of not a title fight at the moment. On the top of the league, 7 points clear. So maybe more of a title cruise. But at some point, that title cruise will turn into a title fight. And if, God forbid for Dortmund, they get an injury to Sancho or Bryn Larsen, Royce, they're going to need these extra attackers that they've got. And Pulisic is obviously a fantastic player, and they should be able to call on him at any point during this title campaign season. So Zorc and Vatska have already said he's not going anywhere. I think Chelsea would be keen to maybe organise a transfer where they could sign him in and then not take delivery of him until the summer. They could do that potentially. But only today, one of the London Evening Standard journalists that's well connected to Chelsea has said, was confirmed reports in Dortmund from their local press that Chelsea have made a bid, but Pulisic has said that he would prefer to go to Liverpool. So maybe that won't put him in good stead with the Chelsea hierarchy, saying that, okay, yeah, I'll go, but I'd rather actually go to one of your title rivals. We'll see how that goes. Obviously, Klopp knows him well. Bayern would obviously be very interested. There'll be other big clubs around Europe looking as well. So we'll have to see it. But I can't see him going in January, as in leaving Dortmund in January. I could see him agreeing a deal with somebody in January. But yeah, Chelsea would like it to be quicker because they're potentially going to be under a transfer ban.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how this one plays out and whether he does move sooner rather than later. But let's talk about more so than actual individual. And the Revierderby is coming up next weekend. Always a rather exciting affair, especially last year's. This is going to be not a late kickoff, which I'm a little bit disappointed about on Saturday. It means it's going to be trickier for us to get information and to watch it, I think. But things are obviously going very well for Dortmund, but lesser so Schalke this year. Manu, what way do you see this game going? Do you see Schalke being able to upset BVB?
This is a tricky thing with derbies, isn't it? I mean, when you look on paper, Dortmund will be the team to absolutely dominate this game and win this game easily because of the way Schalke have played all year. But it's a derby, and the Revierderby is probably the biggest. Well, probably it is the biggest derby in German football, and we all know how derbies work. I mean, you guys just experienced a big derby in Liverpool on Sunday. You know, the favorite doesn't always blow out the underdog. It just doesn't work that way. And then I think on top of that, you have to. This is something that we have observed a little bit with Dortmund the last couple of weeks. Not more than a couple of weeks, the last couple of months, is that they play very well offensively, unless they play against a team that likes to defend with 3 or 5 in the back. You know, the flexible defensive 3 that turns into a defensive 5 when they defend. And that has been something that Dortmund really has struggled with, these wide defensive lines. You know, when there's 5 defenders lined up around a box, making it very difficult to get through on the right and left, the flank play is something that they then start to struggle with. And we've seen that during the week against Bruges. I mean, against Bruges, they had 1,001 passes. They completed 930 of them. You know, that's a pass completion of 93%, and had 76% ball possession, but they could not produce very many good chances. And that's because Bruges was very good at keeping Dortmund away from that attacking third. And when you look at the way Schalke play, they're not a fun team to watch. They haven't been a fun team to watch under Tedesco ever. You know, with the one exception, maybe that 4-4 against Dortmund last year, pretty much exactly a year ago. They have not been a fun team to watch, but the way I see it, they're exactly the kind of team, the way they're set up. And in a derby, you are super motivated. You approach that game very differently than you would approach any other game. Tedesco might just get, with his tactic, get a result out of this game, simply because Dortmund have been struggling against lineups like Schalke's. You know, that's 3, or do they play 3-4-2-1? Sometimes a 3-5-2. I can see Tedesco even going with 5 in the back. And that is something that, you know, Lucien Favre will have to find a solution for. And, I think that could be one where Dortmund maybe will drop points.
Yeah, I think Schalke would get a good kick out of that. But Manu, there's possibly going to be 2 Americans on the field in Pulisic and Weston McKennie. Does this mean that there's going to be more of an interest from a US crowd?
Well, that depends if Pulisic plays. You know, there's all this interest in him, but he hasn't been playing very much because against Bruges he started, then on Saturday Chris covered this game, so I maybe have him chat a bit more about that one in particular, but on Saturday he was out with muscular problems, I believe. And so the question is Pulisic going to play? Weston McKennie is very important for Schalke because he almost plays like a quarterback, doesn't he? And he's very good in linking up midfield and defense, and there will be a lot of attention stateside. I mean, Fox, already is pulling out all the stops to basically advertise this game big times and underline that American factor that's taking place in this game. Weston McKennie against Pulisic in Germany's biggest derby. I mean, this is something that you want to advertise if you're an American television provider.
And Chris, to go to you, just as Manu said, do you agree that possibly Schalke could upset Dortmund here? Giving, therefore, people like, or teams like Gladbach and Bayern a bit of a chance going into the winter break.
Well, Manu is in fact quite right, as he normally is, that Dortmund have struggled to break down sides that go 5 at the back and even go 5-4-1. So you've got 2 heavily loaded defensive banks, and they've struggled against teams like Hannover, Hertha, and as Manu said, against Club Bruges. And they did struggle a little against Freiburg. Freiburg were exceptional. They worked really, really hard. And I put in my thoughts after the match that Christian Streich must be devastated that they left with no points and a 2-goal deficit, because balance of play, they probably didn't deserve that. Had they got a draw, it may have been a well-earned one, but to counter this, I thought that Dortmund were exceptionally patient on Saturday, and that is something that I've not seen as much this season. So maybe Favre has been working on it, because they were quite happy to recycle the play left to right, forward to backwards, and they waited for that initial moment where they could get in behind, and they did that. They did that twice and scored, and almost scored from one more. So I think they got in behind 3 times. Jadon Sancho key to every single one of them. So that was the little bit different from me than what I saw, especially when I was in the stadium against Hertha. They almost started to rush it a little bit. Now, guarantee at the time that they were 2-1 up against Hertha, and there was a little worry in the stadium that Hertha might pull it back, and there was a bit of poor game management. I think that's changed over the last couple of weeks. Now, where they didn't manage to break down Club Bruges, they didn't really have to. I think the Revierderby over the weekend is going to be a real test for them. And because it's away, I would say if they can restrict Schalke to no chances in the first half an hour, and they can just play this football where they're happy just to keep the possession. And don't forget, if you keep hold of the ball, you're going to make your opponents work really hard. Now, Freiburg did work hard, to their credit, but as a team, they ran an extra 5 kilometres than Dortmund, because you have to work a lot harder when you haven't got possession of the ball. So that's a thing, something that this Schalke side may suffer from, because I don't think, from what I've seen, that they'll have the same discipline to work hard as a unit and to run the same as Freiburg did. So it's going to be a real interesting derby, as these always are. And Manu's quite right. You don't know what the score could be. It wouldn't be a surprise for Schalke to win, because it is a derby. But I can't see anything apart from a Dortmund win here. I think Dortmund will have enough quality to eventually break them down. And every time I've seen Schalke this season, one thing that has struck out is that they are exceptionally poor at the back. And when they come against a good attacking 3 or a good attacking 4 on the break, they could get hammered.
Yes, it's going to be an interesting game. I feel, well, good luck to Schalke trying to get anything out of it with how Dortmund have played this season. But I mentioned that it was a good weekend for Dortmund, also for Bayern Munich. But let's talk about RB Leipzig, who managed to beat second place Borussia Mönchengladbach and therefore move third. And they're only a point behind them now. Manu, a great result for them, eh? And defensively, they're looking pretty good recently.
Yeah, it's the Bundesliga Leipzig versus the Europa League Leipzig, right? I covered the game against Salzburg, where I actually thought they played pretty well, but just Salzburg had that little bit extra. And then in the Bundesliga, they just Rangnick's game plan just seems to be working much better. It's interesting how this Leipzig side, remember when they first came into the Bundesliga, it was all about attack. And when you look at the top 6 right now, they have just conceded 10 goals in the 13 games, and that's the least amount of any sides in the Bundesliga. That's very impressive, and it's very much maybe very much against what we would expect from any Leipzig side, because they've also only scored 24 goals, which is the least amount of all the top 6 sides, right? So a little bit against the Red Bull grain, so to speak, but I think it is something that we have to keep an eye on, because it is something that could help Leipzig challenge for the title in the end. And with Bayern having an off year, Borussia Dortmund is looking very steady, but I think if Dortmund drop 1 or 2 games, then Leipzig will be right there. And I think Rangnick, and Chris, you've said this on this podcast before, he may have identified that, right? Because there seems to be a bit of discrepancy between how they play in Europe and the way they play in the Bundesliga. You don't lose 1-0 to Salzburg and then just a few days later beat Gladbach 2-0. It's just not supposed to happen that way. So I think that Rangnick maybe is looking at this and like, look, if we can keep touch with the top, and that's Borussia Dortmund, until the winter break for 4 more games, then reinforcements will arrive, and we have maybe a chance in the second half of the season to really challenge for the title here.
Yeah, that hit home to me, especially when I was in Celtic, because the side he put out, I know they had a couple of injuries that particular week, but the side he put out was never really going to challenge Celtic at the top level on their own ground at Celtic Park. And even in the post-match press conference, he didn't really look that interested in any of the questions. I think it became an inconvenience for them. And I do believe it's because he's identified that this season is probably the best shot that Leipzig will have of winning the league for the 3 seasons they've only been in it. So the first season they went very close and were a surprise package. Last season, I think, we've talked at length how they couldn't really cope with that European battle rhythm, and their squad was a little short. And this season, as you're quite right, Manu, Bayern is stuttering, and they're the best of the rest at the moment. And I think that Rangnick's identified the fact that Leipzig could go all the way this season in the Bundesliga, and he's happy to sacrifice what is still Europe's second competition. I think if they're in the latter stages of a fight in the Champions League group and they're potentially getting through to the round of 16 in the Champions League, I think maybe he's got a decision on his hands. But the fact that it's the Europa League, And Leipzig won't be happy with being in that from the start, obviously playing in the Champions League last season and eyes on playing in the Champions League again next season. I think they're probably quite right to identify a competition to put by the wayside, and the Europa League's it.
But I mean, Chris, would you not say that maybe 8 points behind at this stage, it's almost too much? Bayern have never come back, for more than 7 points. We heard a few weeks ago in the Bundesliga. How can RB Leipzig expect to possibly do that when they maybe don't have the squad that Bayern would have had over the years?
I personally think they've got more chance of clawing back those 8 points than they have of getting to Europa League final and winning it. I think the quality in that competition is still too much.
Well, I'm meaning more if you leave Europe out of the equation completely. Do you really think that they can catch Dortmund and maybe even pass Dortmund this season?
Well, that would obviously depend on Dortmund having a little bit of a crisis. But as Manu said, should they have that crisis now with this win against Gladbach, it sort of puts Leipzig right up there to take any sort of advantage of that. And if Rangnick's trying to fight both competitions, then something has to give. And I'm pretty sure that he won't want his Bundesliga form to give. So he's quite rightly identified that this could be a chance for them to go. I mean, if he just goes, all right, well, you know what, the game's over. We're in the start of December. Dortmund are too far ahead. We'll just give it up. If then Dortmund were to implode round about February time and Leipzig can't make up that gap, then I think everybody would be saying, what's Ralph Rangnick doing? But he's identified that this is probably your best shot. I say if Bayern Munich are stuttering and are not at the races, which they don't seem to look like, even over the weekend, they had a good, solid, I suppose, performance against Werder Bremen, but it wasn't anything that we've seen at Bayern Munich in the last few years. If they're struggling, then you want to be there or thereabouts to be able to have a title pop at that. I personally think Dortmund will go all the way now, but should they have a problem, then Leipzig will want to be there to take control of it, because if we look back 2 seasons, had Bayern Munich had a stumble, Leipzig would have taken full advantage of that and would have won the Bundesliga in their first season, which would have been incredible. So I'm pretty sure that's what's playing on Rangnick's mind, is that he's identifying how, if it all goes wrong for Dortmund, how are Leipzig going to be sat to challenge that?
Yeah, wouldn't that be something else? But Manu, you mentioned that maybe squad depth might be a bit of an issue. Maybe bringing in some fresh players might make all the difference. What type of areas do you think that they need to address? And is there anyone lined up for them to bring in?
Yeah, I thought again the game against Salzburg, one of the big problems that they had was a lot of injuries in midfield, and Kevin Campbell, who has been very good this season when he was fit, and Forsberg as well missing right for big parts of the season already. That really means that they're lacking a little bit in transition play, and is maybe also one of the reasons why they're playing so defensively in the Bundesliga. Why they are not doing this quick counter transition. I mean, we have games where Bruma has to play in midfield and he's a winger, right? It's just you can tell that that they had transfers in mind in the summer, and for whatever reason they didn't work out. And I mean, one of those transfers they now are completed, and that's is signing the right word. They delegated Tyler Adams from Red Bulls New York to Germany. He's a very good midfielder. He's one of the best midfielders in Major League Soccer, only 19 years old. And this was a transfer that I wrote an article on this in September, when it more or less emerged that this deal was going to happen. Both sides were very quiet about it. It was one of those secrets that everyone knew about, and but no one really wanted to make it official, because New York Red Bulls, of course, they played their semi-final in MLS last week, and they wanted to wait until that season was over until they wanted to complete that move. So that's one player. I've written a scout report on Tyler Adams. It's on Pro Soccer USA, and I identify some of the things he can do. He's going to be a Naby Keita replacement, but not the Naby Keita replacement. He's very good in getting the ball in midfield and that quick run that you need, that box-to-box midfield run that you need, and that they're lacking a little bit right now. They have been lacking since Keita left. He can bring that to the team, but I don't think he can bring it to the team on his own because he's a 19-year-old who's making the move from MLS to Bundesliga. It's a big step up, right? So I think, and this will be player number 2. Remember Rangnick said that they have signed 2 players, and that will be Mr. X. Many believe that's Amadou Haidara from Salzburg. Haidara is out for 4 months with an ankle injury, so not sure if he will be a help right away. So I think, Chris, with that news, especially the Haidara news, I can see them maybe sign someone else on top of the 2 players that they've already signed.
So, guys, let's move on and talk a little bit about the protests that happened in Liga 3 this week. A lot of people might be going, well, what is this that we're possibly talking about? Manu, I think you'll be able to break it down better than most. So both teams kicked off and refused to touch the ball for a minute, and then they finally got underway, but it was a rather bizarre scene. What exactly was this for, and is it likely to happen again?
Yeah, so the Liga 3 protests. That's one of many. I mean, German football seems to be full of protests these days, isn't it? And this one was in particularly funny. I tweeted out the video that was shown by NDR, that's the Norddeutsche Rundfunk. They highlighted the Braunschweig game, where the 2 clubs, they passed the ball once, passed the ball back, and then didn't do anything for a minute. And the reason for that is, and I think I've explained this on this podcast before, is the bottleneck, as they call it, between the 4th division and the 3rd division. We have 5 regional divisions in German football, and we only had, until this season, we only had 3 teams getting relegated from the 3rd division to the 4th division. So that meant out of the 5 champions, only 3 of them managed to achieve promotion, right? They had to play playoffs against each other. And my club, 1860, was involved in these playoffs because 1860 won the Bavarian division, but then had to play Saarbrücken, who won the Southwestern division. And 1860 achieved promotion at the expense of another team that actually ended up winning their regional division, right? So the lawmakers in German football have said, well, this isn't really fair. If you play 34 or between 34 and 38 games, because the divisions have different sizes, and you win that division or finish in the Southwestern division, the first 2 actually make the playoffs, or you finish 2nd, you should be given an automatic promotion, right? The champions should be promoted. So the 4th division said, okay, well, we're going to reform. In order to help the 4th division reform, Liga 3 said, the 3rd division said, okay, we are going to introduce an extra relegation spot. So instead of 3 teams getting directly relegated, we're going to make it 4. But that is going to be our contribution. You down in the 4th division, you have to merge. You have to get rid of one of the divisions. One of the 5 divisions has to give and has to be merged with the other one. So the lawmakers quickly identified, okay, that must be the Northeastern Division, the old GDR League, which is now governed by the old GDR Football Association, the NOFV. And petty politics, regional politics in German football are very strong. They said, well, we don't want to give up our league. And then the Bavarian League said, well, we don't want to take teams in from that division because we don't want to give up our Bavarian League. So they basically had these discussions last week and came up with no solution on how to fix this promotion relegation problem. And then the 3rd division said, look, we gave you an extra relegation spot. We want you to come up with something. And that's what this protest was about. It was about basically telling the DFB and the different regional associations within Germany, get your act together, because in the end of the day, we gave our part. You have to do your part now and try to come up with a solution in this.
And Manu, do you think that there's going to be a solution from this, or do you think this is going to be a bit of a long, drawn-out process?
It's very difficult. The big difficulty is that we have Rainer Koch, for example. He's the president of the Bavarian Football Association and the Bayerische Fußballverband. and he's also the vice president of the DFB. So he gets his power from a very strong regional football association, right? And the Regionalliga Bayern, it's the only regional division in German football that has the name of one of the German states in the league, right? The Regionalliga Bayern is his pet project, and having the Bayern Liga sort of in his back as a strong first division that represents the state of Bavaria is something that they get a lot of power from. The same is true for the power makers in East German football, right? Having that strong regional league is a big power base. So they don't want to budge. It's power politics. It's one of those regionalisms in Germany that are quite common in Germany. We see them in federal politics as well, that sometimes states broker with each other because they want to get something from one another, right? Germany's strength in many ways is decentralization, but it's also sometimes one of its weaknesses, and it shows it right there that regional politics can be very strong. And I think it's going to be very difficult for one of those regional politicians, because I think a lot of clubs would be quite happy to come up with a compromise, but the politicians on the top, they are not willing to give up their power base.
Yeah, all politics, eh? Hopefully they get some type of resolution rather soon. There, I have a feeling this is going to go on for a little while. But Chris, I have a feeling that you're going to be bugged all week by potential news coming out of Southampton in a new managerial appointment that looks like it's going to happen. All the media sources are reporting it. What exactly is going on? Mark Hughes has been sacked.
Yeah, so Southampton, who are just about clear of propping up the Premier League, so they're third from bottom at the moment, with games coming this week, sacked their manager, Mark Hughes, ex-Manchester United player, for anybody who doesn't know who he is. He's one of these British managers that goes on the management merry-go-round. I read a fantastic tweet today of the money that he's earned just from being sacked, which is phenomenal. Football's the only industry where if you perform really badly, someone pays you your contract out. So yeah, he's earned his last few jobs by this management merry-go-round. So put him, for anyone that watches English football, in the same bracket as Alan Pardew, Sam Allardyce, Tony Pulis, those sort of managers, where he's just known for going to lower league sides, doing really not much, and then getting sacked. So anyway, Southampton have sacked him because they're looking at going back to how they were. They used to have Pochettino, who left for Spurs. They used to have Mitchell, who left for Leipzig, recruitment specialist. So Southampton have identified Ralph Hasenhüttl as their new manager. Now, this broke Monday morning in the UK. That would have been Monday, the 3rd of December. Broke early doors that Hughes was sacked. And then very, very quickly, Southampton-based media in the national, so the regional reporters for the national newspapers, very quickly said that Hasenhüttl had been identified. That sort of grew legs over. Obviously, we're talking on Monday night, the 3rd, the night of the 3rd. And now it's looking as if that's pretty much a done deal, in inverted commas, because there's no official announcement from either Southampton or from Hasenhüttl himself. But it looks very likely. These things happen in football all the time. A manager's sacked after a draw. Southampton drew with Manchester United 2-2 over the weekend, and Hughes was sacked. Something very similar happened at Liverpool. Liverpool drew with Everton. Brendan Rodgers was sacked. Well, that's because they'd already agreed a deal in Klopp to come in. So these things do happen in football. And yeah, it looks like Ralph Hasenhüttl could be coming to the Premier League.
Yeah, very exciting, especially Manu, for a guy that we regard quite highly with this past in the Bundesliga, but it seems only recently he was even linked with a job at Arsenal when Wenger was leaving. They're going to be getting a fantastic coach at Southampton if this does go through.
I thought Tuchel is taking the Arsenal job. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. Just kidding. it's funny because the last thing that I heard from Hasenhüttl's camp was that he wanted to stay on a sabbatical, and then so I was a bit surprised by these news initially, but as Chris said, these things can go super fast, so they did. From what I'm hearing from Germany, Süddeutsche Zeitung has pretty much confirmed the deal. From the German angle, I'm hearing that. Yeah, he's more or less agreed in principle. Now, the reason why I was sort of laughing, because agreed in principle in German, if you translate it a little wrongly, can mean something very different. So that's why initially I was like, oh, I hope this is not a translation mistake, because yeah, he was quite adamant he wanted to have a sabbatical until the end of the year, which in turn should make Southampton fans very excited, because it means that they must have promised him something to make this job very appealing to him. And that means he's not going to be, I've seen a tweet from one of the English writers, I don't remember who it was, that said he will be another typical firefighter. I can't see that at all. He is a concept coach. You bring him in because you want to build something. Ingolstadt did this. He got Ingolstadt to the first division, kept them in the first division. Then he moved on to Leipzig. He finished second with Leipzig. He finished sixth with Leipzig last year, which, yes, wasn't that great, comparing it to the first season, but that's the first 2 seasons in the Bundesliga. You know, I don't see very many promoted sides that can say that. The one thing that people criticized a little bit in Leipzig the second season, and we discussed this quite a bit on the pod, is that there was a bit of regression in the side's development. And this is something that Rangnick, he's very harsh. He didn't like that. Hasenhüttl lacked a little bit of a plan B tactically. And some of the players didn't make the step forward that the club expected. Timo Werner is a good example, right? And then the fact that he didn't like to train set pieces. How many goals did they concede from set pieces, and how little goals did they score? That was a big matter of contention. I remember that quite well. We covered Leipzig on the ground quite a bit last year, and that is something that was repeatedly said. So I think those are things that he will have to address himself. But sometimes, and I think this is quite fitting to Hasenhüttl's career, sometimes you have to take a step back in order to take 2 steps forward. Because, no disrespect to Southampton, I actually think that is a step back. But Southampton is one of those clubs that traditionally, historically, Chris will correct me if I'm wrong here, have always been a club that has sort of been a little bit of a trendsetter. So if he's able to get resources from the club, get the money from the club, and he himself is able to kind of slightly reinvent himself, this could be one of those things where in 3-4 seasons he could be at a big club.
Yeah, most definitely. And the Southampton are renowned for bringing through fantastic academy players. Gareth Bale, for instance, Alex Oxlade-Chamberlain. There is many a English and British player that started their time as a youngster at Southampton, so he will get to work with exciting academy prospects, which is pretty much what he did at Leipzig, worked with very young, talented footballers.
Yeah, it seems like Southampton are going to get a fantastic coach there. And yeah, Chris, you're going to be busy, I feel, in the next week explaining to the English media and Southampton fans who exactly they're getting. But as Chris mentioned, we're podcasting on the Monday night because it was a Monday night game. It was wet, it was dreary, and it was rather bad, if I'm being honest. But Manu, more protests. We talked about a protest earlier, and more protests at a Monday night game. We've had this last season and the season before, but you guys really don't like Monday night games, do you?
Who likes Monday night games? Come on.
People sitting in their house nice and dry watching a good game of football, but we didn't get any of that today. And I really feel
if you're traveling to the games, a Monday night is possibly the worst day to do it. Just ask poor Matt Marshall who was at this game. No jokes aside, I like the banner that Nuremberg had up, because the fans, the ultras boycotted the first 45 minutes of the game, even though the Bundesliga has already announced that they're going to abolish the Monday games, I think from 2021 forward, right, in the new television contract. It read, we didn't get promoted to play on Monday nights, because of course Bundesliga 2 since 1993 had the Monday night games, and in the 90s and into early 2000s, if you were relegated, one of the jokes was always, yeah, well, now you have to play on Monday nights. So I thought that was actually a very good banner. And, but it's also a banner with some history, because the fans are not only protesting Monday night games in the Bundesliga. They've gotten their way in the Bundesliga, but they're continuing their protest because they're saying no Monday night games, period. No more on Bundesliga 2, no more in Liga 3 where they have it as of this year. So there were protests also in the Grünwaldstadion in Munich on top of this 1-minute protest in the third division. There were protests throughout games in the Bundesliga 2 as well. And today it came out that Bundesliga 2 the fan power behind this is just magnificent, that they're actually going to abolish it starting in 2021 as well. That's huge. I mean, Chris, we've talked so many times about the fan power in Germany. That is it. The fact that they can do it, that they can step in and say, no, we're not going to accept this. We're going to make you play in empty stadiums.
Yeah, and for the most part, it's been pretty peaceful. It's been through boycotting, it's been through disruption, but can we say peaceful disruption? Throwing tennis balls onto the pitch, toilet roll, that sort of stuff that we saw at Frankfurt last season, Dortmund as well, with the tennis balls. You know, they're renowned for complaining is the wrong word, for protesting, and I think it's quite right, because football is, and I say this all the time, football is for the people and it's played by the people. So I think it is really hard when you're asking people to finish work at 4:00 and travel 200 kilometers to go and watch a football game. And even without the protests, once the ultras have come back in, it's still not particularly full on some of these Monday night games. So yeah, I think the DFL have come to their senses, because it's not nice for them to sell this product across the world and see half empty stadiums or stadiums with toilet roll being thrown and banners and people not particularly happy. So yeah, and I can only imagine that if Bundesliga 2 was followed suit, that Liga 3 will follow suit quite quickly, and Monday night will be a football free for everyone.
Which in turn means we can actually record this on a Sunday. That's really the most important part about all of this.
Listeners get it a day earlier, right?
Yeah.
You know, so everybody wins, really.
Yeah.
Well, guys, I think that more or less covers it for this week. We've had a lot to discuss, but we've discussed it rather rapidly. I'm impressed. We've obviously got plenty of football coming your way on the Football Grad Network. But Manu, what would you like to draw people's attention to?
Yeah, well, I think in England they're busy this week. This is what we call in Germany an English week, right? With midweek fixtures. We don't have any midweek games other than this Monday fixture. So yeah, there's going to be a couple of features, I guess, on footballgrad.com. Keep your eyes open on that. Same with the other networks. And then as we get closer to the weekend, the Bundesliga previews, we always do some previews on other games played around Europe as well. They're going to come at the second half of the week. They're going to come your way. But other than that, it's going to be a bit of a more quiet week. The last one before we get into the real thick of things and around Christmas time.
Yes, indeed, and things will really heat up then. Chris, what have you got going on this coming week? No midweek games. Are you going to be okay? Are you going to be bored?
Bryce, I am not going to be bored. I'm not going to be bored at all. As listeners will well know, as well as covering German football, I cover Liverpool, who are knee-deep into 11 fixtures in 40 days. So I'll be pretty busy. Don't worry about me.
No, of course. We're not going to worry about you at all, because you'll be fine. But yeah, guys, if you're looking for more football in the meantime, I'm sure the Football Grad Network will have plenty to offer. Just head over to @FootballGrad Live on Twitter as well. We also welcome you to get in touch with the podcast. There may be more questions from Southampton fans or about anything, to be honest. So make sure to get in touch, and we'll try and cover what we can for you in future podcasts. Thank you very much for tuning in, and yeah, until next week when we've got a rather exciting weekend with the Revierderby. Until then, auf Wiedersehen.
Ich warte seit Wochen auf diesen Tag und tanz vor Freude über den Asphalt. Als wär's ein Rhythmus, als gäb's ein Lied, das mich immer weiter durch die Straßen zieht. Komm dir entgegen, dich abzuholen.
It wouldn't be the holiday season if there wasn't candy, right? Celebrate the holiday season with the Holiday Crush. They've sprinkled candy with a holiday theme and fun-packed challenges every week for 5 whole weeks, finishing on January 4th. The more challenges you complete, the better your chances of unwrapping delicious rewards. So, are you ready to crush the holidays? Play the Holiday Crush now. Download it from the App Store, Google Play, or Windows Store for free. Terms and conditions apply.
Thank you for listening to Believe. You can show support to your host by subscribing to the show and giving us a 5-star rating on your preferred platform. Check us out at Believe.com and search for BLEAV on YouTube.